Salamandra.uk Tech and SaaS Multimedia Marketing Meetup, where we bring together a network of marketing professionals within the tech industry for online webinars every 6 to 8 weeks. We host talks from industry experts on all things marketing in tech and SaaS, covering a range of hot topics within the industry. Each event includes at least 3 speakers, followed by a panel discussion and Q&A session. So we record all these and these live events, and then we share them on our YouTube channel, links of which will be distributed. And today's topic is human to human, or H2H marketing, tech in the creation of authentic content. That's why we're talking about which authentic Christmas ad we prefer just now. The pandemic took us all by surprise, and the rapid change in brand tone of voice is reflective of this. Regardless of whether you work with B2B or B2C, we're all marketing to humans, and what we all appreciate and probably need right now is more transparent, authentic and honest communication. So how do we utilize tech to help in creation of this fresh type of content? So we've got 3 industry experts to speak to you and on that subject, and the first of which is Maria Cadbury from Say It Now, and whose talk is Human Voice Space and End-to-End Attribution. And Maria is a change agent with 20 years strategic advertising experience, working up to executive level, now working in the voice space, what's been termed as the talking 20s, having spent the last 4 years focusing on influencer marketing, where she's built business and thought leadership in the space. She also works with the US and UK companies to help successfully accelerate their businesses in the UK. And Maria ran one of the top 10 ad networks and created 2 new businesses for the last 2 organizations that she worked with. Maria is strong-minded, high energy and highly articulate Irish woman who revels in impactful action. And she's going to cover the big challenges and big wins with the end-to-end attribution, all the new stuff, new products, and H2H from a tech point of view. So take it away, Maria.
Thank you very much. I'll share my screen with you. And I'm just going to present. I'm meant to be at home. Sorry, don't know why we're not the first one. Guys, ta-da! Who would have thought it? So can you all see my screen okay? And all the flicking slides, so that's great. So quickly, I'm just going to introduce myself. I am Maria Cadbury, and I come from Wexford in Ireland, and I came over to London over 20 years ago with curiosity of the world, and I started to study sociology. Sociology can take you in 2 different directions, one into the social policy of the world, or later I discovered to the sparkling world of advertising, and I can actually bring you sweeping into that space, which is after being dazzled by the media agency, that's exactly where I went to. And I spent the first 6-7 years at media agencies before working in ad tech. And then I spent the next 16 years at the bleeding edge of ad tech world, which has been truly exciting. And now working with AI for the last several years, whether it's influencer marketing or now transitioning that into the world of voice. And I feel like this is the most exciting time I've ever had. And this is really exciting to take it through, because it's really understanding advertising, its behavior, its AI, and it's really consumer adoption of this new space that we're going to talk around. So first of all, we're going to look at, right now it's a voice first paradigm. And what that really means is the voice first paradigm will move beyond providing answers to questions using data and insight, and really pivot, changing that to proactively providing insights and guidance that will simplify life for consumers. And that's what's really, really nice about the AI world. It's like once you get past the fear of it, it's this really trust comes through, and hopefully that will come through as we talk. In a voice first world, advertising, commerce, payments, and interacting with others around us will change dramatically. Humans gain so much more from dialogue, and we've come through this world of advertising where we've been broadcasted to, and then into this world of dialogue. And here I want to sort of touch on, when we talk about space, there is the kind of global voice in the voice space, I guess, is somebody called Brian Romelli, and he talks about something really interesting called the human Shannon limit, bandwidth of consciousness. And this is really interesting. It's been studies for the past 150 years, hundreds of studies, that shows that the information we're presented with, we can actually consume. And that had a tipping point on a very specific date where everything went out the window and everything changed on the 29th of June 2007 with the arrival of the Apple iPhone. And since then, the pipeline of competing data and information has basically changed what we can consume. So right now, we can only interpret 1/1,000,000th of all of the data from our senses, and to make it into our consciousness. And this is where I guess the sociologists they make it's really interested in. Human consciousness is not about data and information, even though that's what we spend a lot of our time with. It's really around how to organize, and it's about the order of chaos, which is really interesting. So I think what we want to do is then take this then to look at where we come from, the world, and like the journey of the advertising. And we've got pre-modern, we scripted out, and then in 1700 was the first newspapers, and things got really interesting in the 1800s, where it was actually the first advertisement ad on a billboard. And I'm quite proud to the Cadbury's, and they were really leaders in the space where they produced beautiful, informative advertisements, and they realized the power of the creative and the copy. And then we move on, it gets really exciting in the 1900s, and you've got your first television ad, you've got the radio. Actually, research comes into it, really, really important. The first banner ad on AT&T and Yahoo search, which I remember, and things got very exciting in 2000, 2014, and I do remember when Google turned it, so that makes me really young and cool back then and quite old right now. But it was a really exciting time. You've got Google AdWords and analytics, and Facebook launches during the period, and I'll tell you a bit about that later on, because I was part of the campaign that brought Facebook to the UK when I was working on O2. And then we've got Google launches YouTube. And then we're into 2016, you've got social platforms, Snap, Twitter, Instagram. And then obviously from then to now, you've got influencer marketing, you've got the AI, virtual AI, which is really cool. And then the actual AI assistants and the voice, and Alexa and Hey Google, and that's where we are right now, which is fab. And then here we look at we can now specifically target individuals. So, that's personalizations here. And it's really in its infancy form, I think. But they're still seeing a single ad. And I don't know about you, but that only sits with me so much. When my messaging is just hard to land. And that's been everybody's challenge in advertising forever. I guess this is why at the very beginning I why I'm really excited, because two-way conversation is so much more rewarding, and that's where we've really been driving to. We started out in advertising and display, and then we brought video, and that was a game changer because you can see the emotion and the expression. And if we go back to the data-led side of things, and actually, if you talk about AI and the limitations and the strengths of it, and we can now transcribe quite a lot. But when you transcribe what somebody says, there's a lot of it doesn't bring in the intonation and the meaning behind a certain word. So where one word might just sound like, but it doesn't bring the punch to it. So this is why we get into the voice. I find it very exciting and good, and so that's why we talk about now. As we always knew it, the future has arrived. I've actually stolen this slide from the founder of Say It Now, and he and I, we didn't know each other at the time, loved Knight Rider, and the talking car was just so exciting. And Star Wars is really interesting, and I think we talk about COVID has been a really challenging time for everybody. We've had lock-ins, there's been serious global pandemic, but the other side to it, it's really accelerated technology in every single form. I mean, we're here now, we probably would have met in person, but the technology was always there, but our utilization of it wasn't. between the two lockdowns, there was somebody in work that I know running an event, and they couldn't fly. They could have the event in London, but couldn't fly the keynote speaker in. So they were going to holograph them in, and I was like, Star Trek, like it's really wonderful. So here we are. We talk about the science fight part of it, and then with that, we kind of like going, well, how does that relate to right now? And it's the voice revolution, type of personalization and things we're going to talk about now. And what does the voice revolution mean? It's like devices have a faster adoption than phones. They've had a faster adoption than anything else that we've ever seen. What's really interesting here is the consumer adoption is ahead of the actual technology, and usually the technology is driving it. We're going to talk here, with the consumer adoption. Actually, Jeff Bezos from Amazon, when he launched the Echo, he didn't actually publicize it. What's really interesting there, it was organic growth, and it wasn't by the early adopters. It was actually ordinary people who had the most shopping, who bought the most, who wanted to simplify their daily domestic routine, who set timers, who wanted to find out the weather, who wanted to find out what the recipe was, wanted to find out what my order should be. And that's fascinating, where we're being led by consumers. Because the other interesting thing when you look at the voice space, the only limitations with the devices and where we're going to go is actually with the company themselves, because it wasn't Amazon Bezos' intention to develop what we can do with the assistant. Now, whether that change continues to be the way, but it's actually about the third parties, and I will talk about it in a little while. But think of Apple, and they never built the apps. And think of what happened with Uber, and I'm going to use an example in a minute, but just to give you a teaser with like how these great tech companies empower new companies, and that's what I'll get a chance to talk about, say now, some of the case studies. But what's really interesting about the space is the highly personalized AI opportunities that we're seeing. And if we look at the voice and where we're at with AI right now, it's not even at the stage of the Apple One. So then if you think of like right now, like my kids don't trust me when I say it's not going to rain. They were like, you got it wrong the other week. Alexa, is it going to rain today? We need our rain jackets, which is just really fascinating. And so with the AI assistant, way to think about that is, I'm sure most people here will have been exposed to within their workplace doing a personality assessment like a Myers-Briggs, understand who and what you are in business, and think of the an AI assistant in that sense, like it understands exactly how to profile you, who you are. It understands you better than you do, and they're like your best friend, someone who knows and understands you better than anybody else, and their learning is growing. And so let's go back and look at this, like the voice first revolution. It's full contextual conversation, and then the hyper personalization. So with that, let's take the example of Uber. So Apple produced a phone, then Uber came as an app. Uber was, they brought us around, it was a taxi service, now it's a delivery service. What it is now is a concierge service to us. It's almost like there is a AI assistant that's personalized. So it's the US have adopted this a lot more than here in the UK, but the technology's there. Again, it's just human adoption. Where are you, and how are you adopting it? But for example, you come to London in your Uber and it's like, welcome to London. Would you like a recommendation where to go? I kind of know you go to these places, so we have this place here that you might really like, and you probably want to eat somewhere really nice. You love sushi, so we'd recommend this restaurant because we're taking you here. By the way, you're 15 minutes away or 45. So it's really fascinating about this hyper personalization that's here right now. And then to take me into, I want to take another quote before I take us into Say It Now and the work, which is again by Brian Romelli, hopefully I get his name right. His advice to brands right now, bearing in mind he is the global leader in the voice space, so I'd say he's number one. Obviously I'd say Charlie Cadbury is second because he's the founder of Say It Now, but his advice to brands really and truly is to find out what's your brand's voice. right? So in 1997, every question posed to brand was, what is your website going to look like? Well, today in 2020, when brands are spending hundreds, millions, trillions on creating their brand, he's saying right now you need to understand what your voice is. Where did it grow up? Is it a boy or a girl? Is it them? Do you want an Alexa? What about Hey Google? Are you going to adopt another voice? So these are really interesting questions for a brand to ask themselves. What's your sonic for your brand? But he said the number one next best thing to do alongside that is to get your utility. What is your skill for your business? And I personally really enjoyed hearing that, because I'm working with Say It Now, which is all around end-to-end attribution, building skills, and they are the UK and EU winners of Amazon's Alexa Cup. So Amazon run this globally to see, bring ideas to the table, and it's huge competition. It's really quite exciting. So a few things we're going to quickly talk around, which is I'm going to now to understand the real benefit and how we got to where we are now for machine learning to really work. And there is a tipping point of 80% of adoption. Siri came out here, so Apple were to use soon, and then the Echo arrived 2014, which is it just enabled it to have this success it has had. And just to give you a little demo, wish me luck, of understanding how it works. So you go on to so you get the idea. It's like when you go to your Google Doc, you can use voice, and it's now at a stage where it can concisely translate what you've said, which is really exciting. Kill that so I don't do it again. Yes, we're back on screen. So that's to prove it, which is really nice. And then what we're seeing now is these tech joints, you know, Amazon, Google, and so forth. They're really good at nudging us in behavior when they do want to at the same time. So now they're sort of going, right, this adoption's here, so let's help move the people on as well. Bearing in mind the Echo was organic, and there's nothing after that. There is a huge nudge, and so they're getting us to talk to our speakers in our home, in our car, on the phone, and there's no coincidence with the Google Pixel 4. It's now come out with a stand, and the whole premise there is to sort of start speaking to your device in this object world, so to bring you closer and closer to your AI assistant, which, you know, and they're really good at doing their job. They're really good at doing their job. The stats really stack up here to tell us. So I'll run through these quite quickly. Smart speaker penetration increases rapidly in all regions, and we're looking at 2018 and 2020. UK is ahead of the US, which is really interesting in the smart speaker, but yet their utility might be ahead of us in another way. 72% of smart owners, smart speaker owners use theirs as part of their daily routine, and this number here is flabbergasting. Projected voice transactions in 2025 is 164 billion. So this is Jupiter Research that just came out recently. The one previous to that had 20 billion. So it really is moving at a tremendous rate. So now at this stage, I want to take you through. So I'd say now we build skills, and we start off with really a brand experience, because that's all you could do. A little backstory with Amazon. So to build an Alexa, very close to Amazon and the Amazon team. We won the Alexa Awards. We were really close with them. If it was a brand experience up until recently, because if you wanted to buy something, you had to go, they'd say, oh yeah, just go to your settings, and of course nobody's going to do that. So that's changed, and we'll see how that moves on. I'm going to give you a quick view of this. I'm going to keep an eye on my time. Now I'm going to stop this because of time.
Is that your talk finished, Maria?
No. So I it isn't, but I thought I'd make that one work really, really well. I'll keep talking through it when I just get the last slides up, because I've got just a couple of minutes and I really want to finish that last part. The whole point there was Diageo wanted to build a scale, and they wanted to bring their distillery to the people, which they did a really beautiful job. The stats through that was absolutely phenomenal results, which they had like 7 minutes brand engagement in it. They also thought that consumers are going to interact with one area of their experience, and actually they didn't. It was another area, and because the space is an agile space, they realized that they could build it out and change it out, which is really, really phenomenally interesting. They also found out through it that you can get a huge amount, like the social results was phenomenal as well. So that's been a hugely exciting campaign. Like the data that you get is tremendously rich. So let me go back to COVID, and what Save Now has built is really interesting. So the behavior in the device space really increased because everybody was at home, everybody's really engaging with it. There was a moment where we looked as a business and realized people are listening to their devices, right? And the government, they're listening to music on it, smart speakers are up. Our business is crumbling like everybody else because we're in COVID, the first lockdown, nobody's on advertising, and it's a really challenging world for everybody. But the government in the UK had an Innovate grant for technology solutions around e-commerce, and so with that, the Save Now team produced what I think is a really phenomenal solution that they brought out. It's like right now the global leading campaign for voice transactions, and so they looked at it from the problem they looked to solve was around the charities, and they got 5 of the biggest charities on board. They secured 2.5 million worth of inventory from global, and they ran it on it. And I'll actually I won't run the video, but the video is really, really nice. And if anybody would like to hear what it looks like, just message me or Christine or any of the team afterwards, and I can send it to you. But I'm conscious of time because I jumped a little bit with my tech skills. Let me down. But this is the data, and what's really exciting, and it is exciting because the response I'm getting now from talking to clients is breathtaking. So people have been working in audio for years, audio is increasing, but there hasn't been the attribution, and we can now bring attribution to it. So it's an end-to-end campaign, and here we can tell you, we pull the data from DAX, for example, from the global radio, how long they're in the ad, then we can see the impressions, the donations, the users by time. We can optimize. It's really phenomenal. Which is great. And so now we've gone to market, and like I said with Amazon recently, because they've changed the technology from go to your settings, nobody's going to do that, to use your voice of intonation. Yes, I want to buy. Yes, I want to engage. There is now the voice commerce is finally here, so you can buy it now, respond to your lead gen, and do your brand experience, all underpinned by the data studio. It's really exciting. And the future's great. It's like it's coming to your car. It's coming to your earphones. It's coming over. I'm going quite fast now because I'm at the end of my time, and I just want you to see the future gazing of it. You'll be able to, 47% of people who are listening to TV have their smart speaker, and you can then go, yeah, I really like that ad. Alexa, buy me my lipstick. And so where we are now, it's all about frictionless. 2000, e-commerce just made it that bit more frictionless on web. Mobile came, and mobile just made it that more frictionless for us to buy. And voice commerce is here now for the consumer to make it that bit more frictionless. And that's it. Thank you very much.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Maria. That was amazing. Lots of interesting insights. And as you say, it's all moving very fast, isn't it? It's exciting stuff. I agree. I love it. So next up, we've got Mark Buckle from Amondo, and his talk is called "Can Digital Communication Find a More Authentic and Engaging Voice?" So Mark has spent the bulk of his career working in what used to be called ad agencies, if I can say it properly, mainly based in London, including running his own shop until 2006, at a point when he decided to look for a complete change direction and became an advisor for the NHS England, working mainly in behavioural change programmes in public health. And an evening spent in a pub in 2014 with his son, mainly to contemplate life after uni, led to a tech startup idea that, following 6 years of testing and failing, 1.5 million of investment, and the global pandemic for good measure, now delivers digital content curation services for the likes of O2, Formula E, Team GB, Live Nations, Warner Music, Toyota, and Dr. Martens. So his talk's going to cover a brief exploration of how digital content, especially from brands, tends to be pushed upon consumers, whilst consumers themselves are probably finding greater engagement from their own conversations across social channels. So can both be brought together more effectively to improve engagement around key messages is the question. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to take part in this session. Usual kind of hiatus where I get things up on a screen. Right. Right. Can everybody see that? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to be sort of talking about the same, in a sense, the same subject matter, but from a completely different angle. And actually, I will be slightly looking backwards before looking forwards, in a way that Maria did. In fact, her slides are much better than mine, so I'm going to probably skip through that bit because hers are much more graphically interesting than mine. But it's interesting that as we are going through, hopefully now, a post-COVID period, or rapidly towards a post-COVID period, I think we have learned a lot of things about what are the things that are important to us, the way we communicate with each other, and if we can bundle an element of that under the word authentic or authenticity, because that's what the way we're tending to behave now in a more open and honest way, then I think there are definitely some lessons there for brands and brand owners in the way they choose to communicate to and engage audiences. And that's very much what my my presentation is about. And interestingly, although we are technically a tech company, we see ourselves as slightly different to most tech companies in that we first and foremost are a marketing company. So we think like marketeers, we think about consumers, even if we're talking to customers, like B2B, hence we're a B2B2C marketing company. What we do is work with content and the curation of content, but we do not believe in tech for the sake of tech. So it has to serve a purpose and it has to deliver value to us, but hopefully then towards our customers, and ultimately, because of our consumer focus, to the consumers our clients are working with. And just to help you understand what we do, if you haven't bothered to look on our website, is we, in the last, well, it's been going for 5 or 6 years now, but certainly the last 2 or 3 years, where we've really been doubling down on building out our tech, we've created and have continued to develop a new type of content publishing format. What we do is draw together threads from multiple sources, whether they're from a rights holder or a brand owner, whether it's pre-prepared content, but importantly, we can get hold of content from social channels, be they Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, etc., and we can bring often at the moment we're doing virtual events, but actually the principles are still the same. And within that, we can get content from a mixed set of sources. We can run promotions, data capture, and e-commerce within the product, and we can distribute that product across back out towards digital channels. So whether it's embedded with a client website, embedded within socials, large screens, or indeed things like email. The content itself as a feed is very, very flexible in terms of distribution channels. And we call that product, you can see in the back on the right-hand side there, an imprint. So it's an imprint, a memory of an event, or in a lot of cases with brands, an activation particularly. So just to take a step back before I go and talk about the thing that interests us in the context of this presentation, we are genuinely interested in what we would refer to as authentic brand communication. And I'll come back to a bit of a sort of definition as to what that means to us. But the context for authentic brand communication is that we believe quite strongly that when you're being honest and truthful, I don't mean legally honest, but open in the sense of open communication, you get to better brand storytelling, and hopefully our technology enables that content to be told better by joining up the various aspects of the story, by bringing all the conversation and components together into a single story, into a single feed. But that's kind of interesting, and we think we're very good at that. But actually what we deliver and what we get measured by is the extent to which we drive audience engagement around that content. And that's why we are now working with some fairly major brands, and the way in which we get measured. And I'll come back to how we deliver that in a second. So what I wanted to talk about, though, is my point about going backwards a little bit, is that I think over the last 20, 30 years or whatever, and particularly, if we could call it this, the digital era, which I suspect for most of you it's always been a digital era, but some of us are a bit older and can remember an analog one. But I think we've lost sight of what audience engagement actually means. And to be slightly flippant, but to make the point, I am involved in too many conversations where somebody, it might be another tech company or an ad tech company or a martech company, talking about we'll use this platform because it gets to this audience level, and they're going to spend this much time looking at your content, which could be nanoseconds, but they clicked on something, and therefore we must be delivering an engagement level of Z, whatever. And I think that is in danger of leading too many decisions in brand management conversations, and actually, in a sense, it's slightly the tail wagging the dog, in that actually media delivery of a message, is important, but actually the message itself is what is going to drive, or has the potential to drive, engagement. So people are perhaps spending longer on content, but actually becoming more emotionally engaged in that content. And I think it's that latter point about the depth of engagement, which has gone missing, I would suggest, over the last few years, and as far as the last couple of decades. So the hypothesis is really that engagement cannot just be about reaching an audience. It must, I would suggest, it's about focusing on being relevant and useful as a brand to build better, more valuable relationships over time. And come back to authentic communication and content, I think it's about speaking in a voice that ensures deeper emotional connections with audiences, and thereby creating the foundations of longer term sustainable relationships. And that's kind of what our business is focused on doing, working with its clients. I talked about looking backwards over the last few years, a bit like Maria did. I'm actually not going to run through these charts because I actually would rather spend more time on some case study work. But it's covering the same ground. I didn't go back to the 19th century, but suffice to say, from, I just said 1950 onwards, it's a world of what was termed selling the dream to a generation of consumers. It seems like, well, they've always been consumers. Well, they didn't really, the word consumer didn't really have any proper meaning in the way we'd understand it until the 50s and certainly into the 60s. But it was a period of one-way communication, mass media, but actually, I would argue, quite effective brand storytelling because of the nature of the relationship, the captured audience nature of these things allowed, I think, for better brand storytelling. And towards, and you can argue these dates, but I think maybe 2007 might be a better one. I was picked up by Maria as being the point at which mobile really kicked in and Facebook kicked in. But in the run up to that period, I think there was a change in the nature of the relationship between brands, brand owners and consumers, in that there was at least an analog opportunity to sell the relationship based on more directly targeted media. And I don't know how many of you remember something called direct mail, but it was stuff that used to come through the post, and we used to open it, put it in the bin, a lot of it. But actually, it was at least the beginning of more of a two-way interaction between brands and consumers. And actually, phrases like lifetime value, I think, were beginning to be used for the first time, which is don't sell them something like a product, sell them a relationship, so that people come back for more, you drive loyalties. And actually, certainly the tail end of that, we were moving from direct sell businesses through to full digital e-commerce. So a period of transition. And just being slightly cynical for a second, I think we've gone through a different period now where with the advance of things like programmatic and other forms of ad tech, which is very much a kind of price-driven sort of activity, and the world of clickbait, and actually where it's certainly in social media, our ability to engage with content, we actually become the product. We are the thing that's being sold to advertisers and sponsors. That actually GDPR hopefully is going to clear up, or has cleared up a lot of this, but there's certainly, I think, a dark period where actually the purpose of marketing was chasing, or identifying consumers, chasing data, selling data, without us quite knowing what was going on. And I think that has been part of the journey of almost losing a sense of what the dialogue between brands and consumers was about, because my feeling is it was driven by the desire, the obsession with reach. How do we get to audiences? How do we get them in front of our content? And let's measure the metrics and double down on that. And I think Maria made this point earlier, that it was the advent of the iPhone 5, I think in 2007, where really for the first time mobile first strategies were meaningful. So the idea that most consumers, it's a gradual process, their first interaction with most branded content was going to be on the mobile phone. That changed everything. And that's kind of where we came in as a business, trying to rethink some of these sort of behaviors and some of these actions that had gone on in the past. So as part of what we think about as a business and why we promote our product the way we do, and encourage our customers to think slightly differently about what they do with content, we are trying to get them to think in a slightly more balanced way and this is not to suggest the world of being led by transactions and data is not where we're at. We're not trying to undo that. It's with us. But it still is focused on what was consumed, when was it consumed, where was it consumed. So we're looking at the data for insights about how we can sell more to the same people or look like customers, et cetera, et cetera. And what we're trying to do is just to rebalance it slightly to say that actually begging the question, why is it being consumed, could be as important as all those other questions. And actually what is motivating behavior towards us becoming, or consumers becoming more loyal to brands, is as important now as it was 30 years ago. But I think some of the qualitative assessments around why consumers do what they do and why they're loyal to brand X rather than brand Y is still something that needs to be not rediscovered, but put back in the mix, I think, much more in the forefront of a lot of our planning. And that probably sounds a little bit abstract, and apologies, but I just thought, well, why not? Let's sort of kick back a little bit and reflect on what we mean by authentic communication and content. But actually, hopefully, some of the work we've done, and I've chosen a particular case study working with Dr. Martins to actually hopefully bring some of the things I've said to life. And the important thing for us, certainly in the context of our relationship with Dr. Martins, is that we're a small business, but with less than 10 people. But we're able to have these kind of conversations with fairly major brands, I think, because we're generally saying something different. And part of that is born out of our ability to take content, repurpose it, and mix it up with consumer content, and actually allow that in many ways to drive authenticity. And as brands go, none is, I would argue, much more authentic in the grand scheme of things than Dr. Martens. They've been going around a long time, but they're still quite a credible brand. And I'll just show you some work that we're doing, or have been doing with them over the last 12, 18 months. I haven't got time to click any of this stuff, but hopefully the animation will give you some sense of what's going on. But we now work with Dr. Martens across 4 main areas. Those are Dr. Martens owned events. They'd run in, I don't know, down in Camden or something. But we're using a mix of branded content, talent content from artists that they're actually putting on, but also content from influencers and fans. And whether it's in the context of a Dr. Martens owned event or festival activations, what we're able to do is create something where actually the bulk of the content's already been produced, but we're actually augmenting it and actually adding to it through the involvement of fans of the brand, whether they're formal, with a capital I influencers, or just Joe Public wanting to talk about their love of the Dr. Martens brand. But what we're able to do is combine their love of the brand with stuff from a festival where they're activating, and it's that sort of melange of stuff that actually makes, importantly, and I'll come back to this in a moment, the dwell time on this amazing. I have to say it doesn't beat 7 minutes, but our average, that I think Maria touched on, but our average for every imprint we've ever made is 75 seconds with consumers consuming branded content. And certainly compared to the likes of Instagram content or Twitter, then we know we're absolutely smashing that out of the park in terms of the actual engagement in the content. We're actually now taking the same principles, the same format, the same formula, you could argue, into store activations. So around the back of DM stores now, hasn't started yet, we just did a pilot in, I think, in California actually, where we're actually taking not exactly the same content, it's slightly tweaked, but actually it sits within a store environment, and it actually is enabling consumers who are going to that store to contribute content to the brand. So literally you get shortlisted for going up onto that screen in a store and potentially going out onto other more bigger global footprints. And then finally, brand campaigns where we're getting people to actually talk about themselves and actually in I think quite an insightful, quite a deep way about people's personal passions, but actually rendered in a way where it's kind of branded by Dr. Martens, but it's actually bringing together the consumer, involving them in the brand narrative. And that is a very powerful thing, made even more powerful by the fact that rather just being a single ephemeral Instagram post, it's something, content that builds, evolves, and people can come back to, whether it's around a brand campaign or a festival activation or an in-store activation. And the important thing here is this is not just about pretty pictures. Actually, we drive strong performance. So I've actually stolen this slide from a DM's presentation, but the reason why they come back to us is because we drive engagement, but we do it in a certain way that actually is more useful to Dr. Martens, because it's not just about the metrics. The metrics are fantastic, everybody loves them, and we sort of are very reliant on them in terms of reassuring ourselves we've done a good job. But actually, if you look to the left, what Dr. Martens are as passionate about is the fact it makes their brand look great. And we're only taking their content and using stuff they've already produced, but actually by augmenting it by fan content to add to its authenticity, we know that's actually driving the performance. And just to use a bit of a kind of graphic for a second, in terms of, we are now working with Dr. Martens globally. We're part of their global brand planning process now. And the way we are sort of playing things back to each other is that there are kind of almost 5 strands to what we do at a kind of level above the communication. But the key to it is that first block there, involve. So we're actually actively recruiting customers and influencers, general fans of the brand, in the development of the brand strategy. I don't mean literally the planning documents, but the sense of what the brand is about, what its purpose is, what should the brand be inspired by, whether it's latest trends or latest conversations going on around the planet, and actually physically engage them in that content, the creation of it, but the consumption of it, the building of stories within which we can inform. I tell people more about a new product launch, etc., etc. We can incentivize through dropping e-commerce links into content or promotional hookups, sign-ups, etc., etc. But importantly, because we're driving engagement, we're creating a fantastic environment for research. And so key to the process now is what we call just understand, which is part of the cycle to know how to improve things is actually to talk to consumers in a qualitative way. So conversations about how people are feeling, about the brand and about other things in their lives to help shape strategy. And in that sense, trying to bring all these strands together, the way we view, or kind of I personally view this word authentic or authentic communications or content, is that by doing that or thinking about that in a different way, and of course, the context is always different depending on who the brand is. So whether it's a sports brand or a music artist or a B2B pharmaceutical company, whatever, these things all have different meanings. But the principles, I think, are still very much the same. In your world, what does it mean to be authentic? You know, should you be engaging people or customers or involving them in the development of content, in the development of stories? What's the kind of your equivalent loop from, you know, the planning of things to the reporting of things to the improvement of the way you communicate? I am quite comfortable with the idea that authenticity as a kind of umbrella thought is now at the very center of a lot of brands thinking, or should be, and it should be shaping the brand strategy, brand communication, to get to more effective brand storytelling. And that in itself will help the process of developing and improving audience engagement, which then, you know, because we're not just doing this for the hell of it, gets you towards greater brand affinity and then hopefully increased sales. So it's a slightly different presentation to Maria's, and I suspect it'll be different to the next one, but that's what I took out of this sort of brief, as it were. And just the final thing for me, I'm only showing this because we're really chuffed with it, but we're just working with Formula E, and they're using our format, the imprint, to form part of their broadcast around the world. So, and what's so important to us, I mean, Formula E are a brilliant business. They absolutely get the consumer. Their product is shaped by the consumer. So they actually, I think if you've got enough likes on I think it's Instagram, you can actually improve the power of the engine of your team. Absolutely crazy, but hey, there you go. But for a business like Formula E, which is just another brand, who get the consumer, the ability for them at a broadcasting level to be engaging consumers and the content that consumers are creating, and to start their own conversations around that in a broadcast environment, feels very, very different to me to Formula One. That's still much more one way, up on the pedestal. You know, the Lewis Hamiltons of this world, just projecting out what they do and the skill which they do it. I think Formula E is a sort of different kettle of fish, different kind of technology, obviously, but actually is properly embraced the way in which the consumer can shape the way a product is developed, but also the types of conversations and storytelling that actually a brand that needs to engage audiences can do very well. And yeah, we're very pleased to be working with Formula E. So that's it from me. As I would normally say, any questions, but I'll leave it to the end.
Thanks, Mark. That was really interesting. Interesting how fandom actually adds more authenticity in the original way that you guys have been doing that. It's amazing. So thanks for that. And number 3 of our illustrious speakers is Jyoti Balani from Fresh River AI, and her talk is called Leveraging Emotional Intelligent AI for Authentic Storytelling. Now, Jyoti Balani is founder and managing director of Fresh River AI, a leading enterprise conversational AI and data science consultancy. Quite a mouthful. She's developed conversational AI and data science frameworks and executed them at enterprise, including Lowe's, Citigroup, American Red Cross, Google, and Verizon, to name a few over the past few years. She also leads strategy and design at Open Voice Network, which is Linux Foundation funded, and Women in Voice, NJ chapter, both global nonprofits looking to build the next generation of emotionally intelligent talent, design and user trust in the conversational AI space. Her talk covers how humans love stories and brands with smart, emotional, intelligent stories, and how they successfully attract and retain a loyal following and drive, of course, revenue. Look at Apple, Facebook, Coke, amongst others. And one of the key challenges brands and marketeers face is creating a constant flow of authentic stories at scale to stand out in a very noisy digital world. Jyoti will explore how AI can augment human intelligence to create scalable stories in various media forms. And spoiler alerts, we will still need humans. So over to you, Jyoti.
Thank you so much, Christine, Maria, Mark. That was incredible. I've made some notes because I think there'll be a nice tie-in to what I'm about to help explore. So, first of all, let me share my screen here. So I am set up. Can you all see my screen? Yes, perfect. And I'm going to move you guys over here so I can see everyone right here. Okay. So first of all, when you hear AI and data science, you think, what's a engineer doing on this call? So I just want to give you a little bit of my background. So in my first half of my career, I actually went through being a software developer, pivoted to being a product developer, and pivoted to be a marketeer. So I sort of capped off my technology and product building years with 5 years of marketing, because I really wanted to understand, how do you market B2B? And so I feel the pain of marketeers and brand owners in the problems that they face. And so, wearing those shoes really helps, right? To sort of say, I think I know what I'm talking about because I have empathy. So with that, let me start. And thank you for the kind introduction, Christine. Appreciate it. And thank you for the invitation. So I'm going to first start and see if there's any, folks here that would recognize the fact that we've got, how do we create content, right? We got a budget, what are you going to write, right? You sort of say, okay, do we regurgitate more? By the way, both Mark and Maria, the fact that there is so much content out there, I find that it's a very noisy world. And the question is, how do you stand out? And I see Mark, that's very innovative. I love that imprint concept, which I'll get into in a couple of slides too. It's like the way you have repurposed and reimagined, and also mixing the brand voice, right, from a sonic branding standpoint, with the customer's voice. What they generate truly becomes the voice of the customer. And so the brands are actually amplifying their customers, and people love listening, about themselves. So it's like a psychological thing that you're trialing. I think it's fascinating. There's so much psychology in this. I just wanted to say, what people think. How do you? I led a team when I was running marketing for a couple of companies, and my team would say, okay, let's put up something funny. Let's try to see how we can get more eyeballs in, right? Either to our website or to our social media, right? Everybody goes through that process. This one's probably my favorite. Is when you create blogs, it's really a post. You've got a follower, and who's commenting on stuff, right? There's just so much content out there sitting in many forms, and it's almost like we've diluted where it's found. And the content is not for everybody. It's finding your cohort that needs to focus in, that you want to get their attention and make them feel good about what you're selling, right? So anyway, diving right in. So conversational AI, and I think this audience is probably familiar with, voice, AI-enabled voice with Alexa skill, etc. But I've sort of taken my framework, having been a product developer for a long time, to say, what is this channel? And to me, the conversational AI type of channel is something we've never really experienced before. We've had mobile, we've had web, but this is a human language channel, but it solves all business problems, right? So every company is trying to do one or more of these 5 things at any given time, right? You look at any company out there, the projects I've done or companies I've worked for where I've led marketing, everybody will say, we need to authentically engage our audience. We need to improve the experience, personalization, top line, bottom line, right? But for today, I want to explore really that first part, right? And I think both Marie and Mark have covered the history, which I think was brilliant. By the way, I was previously taking notes, and I will rewatch the recording because I think you've captured the era of how we've gotten to where we've gotten. And Mark, I really agree with you. I think we've just created too much noise and we've forgotten what authentic engagement really is. You know, you throw all this content, we're almost like vomiting on people, because I feel it as a consumer, and I'm trying to figure out what is important to me. So it's just very noisy. So how do you get the clear channel from all that noise, right? So part of what I've been working on is to say, okay, let's start from the beginning. You know, what is authentic engagement 101? And I'm sure this can be expanded in many different ways, but I'm just starting as a very basic level, right? From a storytelling point, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Yuval Harari, right? He's written Sapiens. He really talks about going back to the beginning of human storytelling, right? It's come from the times that I think humans started to talk. Brands love telling stories, right? Which is all about how do you authentically engage, but how do those teams within these brands actually come up with authentic content ideas day in and day out? You know, if at any time I go Google any search word, I will get tens. Obviously, I only stick to the first page. You know, people saying the same thing, they're regurgitating. And I love curation, you know, like the next person, just like curate, but I would use a service. Like, for example, I get my news from Trevor Noah. I don't watch any other news channel anymore because I love the way he delivers it. But how do you generate that content? So my thesis here is to say, okay, if you look at the traditional approach today on how content is generated, and I used to do this with my team too, by the way, when I was heading marketing, right? It's a lot of work. What's the content plan and strategy? What are we going to have relative to, you know, laying out a calendar? What's our strategy? What are we going to talk about? What do you do to inform that strategy? Then what do you do to create that content? What is that process? What are the tools, right? We've got Adobe, we've got like a myriad of tools out there that you could use to actually create it. And you have a content plan, you know, how are we going to deliver the execution part? And then you keep analyzing, right? This sounds about standard, I think, in how teams generally tend to think about creating content. And what I'm proposing to do is to say, from a content ideation standpoint, I'm focusing in on that part, is really the concept of intelligent augmentation. So, you know, AI is not going to take over the world anytime soon, just given where the technology is, right? Maybe in 50 years or maybe 20 years, you know, some people are bullish on this. But how do you help marketeers and brand teams actually think about generating content ideas to stop the problem of a noisy digital world, right? There's just so much coming at us because we're trying to engage and fight for attention. And the idea here is conversational AI and data science actually have they're really, really good tools to help automate the mechanics of content ideation. What I mean by that is, you know, when you're going and searching online, you're going to go to your favorite, you know, publications. You might have some services that are giving you like feeds, RSS feeds. That's a lot too for a human brain to comprehend. So how do you go collect that data? So web crawling, which some of you may have heard of, is actually become very interesting because you can crawl your own company's intranet, because, you know, large brands are very siloed. So if you think about where content is sitting, it's sitting in multiple websites, different teams. You know, the marketing and branding team has to go study what is the internal content framework look like in the company. It's a lot, right? And then there's the whole external world. What's being published on the web? What are your competitors doing? What are your customers doing? What are your vendors saying, right? There's a lot to process to say, what story should I tell? How do I make what I'm about to bring out stay true to my brand by looking at internal, but also looking at the external world, because we're part of a bigger ecosystem. The machine learning part is you take that data that you have web crawled, and there are tools available to do semantic, contextually valid searches to then take that data and feed it to your bot. Effectively train it so that ultimately from a conversational AI standpoint, and I'm talking about building tools for marketeers and brand teams that actually have to generate content ideas and write the content and work with, Armando, and work with Maria, with, your companies to say, this is what we want to say, right? It's one thing to say, okay, we'll take your brand content, but who's creating that brand content, right? So this is where I see the dots connect, is how do we help marketeers and brand teams generate those ideas, and having an assistant that eats and web crawls on a continuous basis what's going on, and listen to the outside world and the inside world of the company itself, to actually be able to give you a human interface where the marketeers can ask questions and get ideas. So it's almost like it's eating the world of content, delivering it structured and unstructured, by the way, right? So you can have, not just well-written documents, but they could be sitting anywhere, and basically coming up with ideas and allowing the marketing teams and the branding teams to ask the virtual assistant questions from that entire corpus of data. So they can focus on the content, what are the ideas to write, and then the format. Interestingly enough, and I'm believing in serendipity, has been for the last 10 days, I've been meeting people that have just sparked these connections. And I heard this woman, I don't know if you've heard of ivy.com. It was started by 2 Harvard graduates that said, when we're at Harvard, why don't we have access to all the amazing speakers and content? And so they went off and started ivy.com, which is a social university. I hear this woman, Melanie DeZiel, she's the founder of Content Story Fuel. And she is an ex-journalist, New York Times, Washington Post. So she's got really strong roots in journalism. She's created this. So I literally took it from a website. She and I actually having a conversation next week. If you think about what she's built and saying a framework, it's really taking this framework and trying to use it as a way to augment human intelligence to generate that content that's meaningful, that authentically allows you to tell a story and also engage with your audience, right? Because you don't want to create repetitive content. You can curate it, but how do you create original content creation? I think has become a challenge. So I found it interesting that she's created a framework to say, okay, we can methodically go down each of these types of, writing, infographic, and I'm going to put imprints, Mark. I think imprints are probably a new row here. And then what do you talk about? You can talk about people. You can talk about the basics of what you're selling, the details, history, right? So the scope of what you can talk about is vast. A virtual assistant that actually goes and does that grunt work for you to collect everything that exists today, allowing you to be free for the creative process. To me, that is liberating. And I think if we allow AI to help the humans be more of the creative storytellers, because I don't know about you guys, but I know when I was running marketing, we would be bogged down by tools and process and systems, and there would be not enough time to do the deep thinking work on creating original content because we're moving so fast. So if we can take out the mechanics, let AI do that work for you, you free up your mind to do that deep thinking. And I think that's where the value, that's why I said, the spoiler was, you're going to need humans, but have the humans really focus on the creative process, because I don't think AI is there yet, right? In doing that, although you do hear about AI creating music, but it's still coming from human generated starting points, right? So a little bit about what AI and ML is capable of. So, what I help teams and companies think through is what are the possibilities in leveraging AI and data science, right? So just to give you some ideas on what we pull from our tool belt is you can do data cataloging, right? If you're going to talk numbers, if you're going to talk about trends, right? How do you generate graphs? How do you do contract analysis? This is actually very popular among our clients, is because every company has contracts, for example, right? Not very, marketeers may or may not need this, but certainly every function sits on a huge set of contracts. Summarizing texts, right? You have documents that you got to read. Who's got time to read tons of document? Imagine you've got the ability for the AI to go scrape it and give you synopsis, like cliff notes. Q&A, I think FAQs are pretty popular with conversational AI bots. Web crawling, we've talked about, that's just one use case of what you could do. And then analyzing reports. So really helping humans get through the grunt work and get to have more space and time to think about the creative process. That's really where we're really excited about the power of what AI and ML can do for the human. So that's really the crux of where I think we need to get to. And I'm not saying that it is perfect. We are very early in the innings of what AI and ML is capable of, but I do believe there are areas of opportunity where we can help, for example, generate content, right? Authentic content. So that's sort of the story part that I've thought through. And I want to end you with this is, you know, how much story do we have versus branded content, right? There's just so much out there. And I feel like we can get people's attention with going back to basics, like Mark was talking about, is like, you know, we've forgotten that how do you actually tell engaging, authentic stories rather than just, you know, vomiting content, which is what I feel like is happening to all of us as a human race. So I think I've done it pretty quickly, Christine. So I wanted to give more time for Q&A and maybe interaction. You know, time back to you with the
wonderful.
audience.
Thank you. I'm loving those cartoons. They're very good. So we've got some questions for you guys. So I don't know if Abby, you want to read them out. We've got one from Scott. Would you read that out? Are you going to read it out?
Yeah, of course. So Scott's wondering, is there a balance to be struck between keeping your brand in the consumer eye more than your competition and putting out too much content and creating disengaging noise? And if so, how would a brand identify that balance point for their audience?
I'll kind of happily start a response, or I'm not sure I'll come up with a magic answer, but my counsel would always be to a brand, and although we're more in the curation space than we are in the content creation space, going back over previous experiences with brand owners, clearly if you're in a kind of market where big budgets are in play, so FMCG markets or telcos or whatever, at the end of the day, share of voice will be the thing that determines quite a lot of things, but not always. So I think back to the UK, and I don't know how many people are viewing this from the UK, because it might not be meaningful overseas, but I know from reading the stats or the stories, there are plenty of businesses that will go and find your insurance for you, you know, comparison sites, whatever. And I read the other day or the other week that the brand that has the biggest standout is called Compare the Market, but it's only the 4th largest advertiser. So it, I think, has thought about what it is choosing to say and do it in a kind of very concerted way, very meaningful way to engage consumers. And okay, it's kind of TV brand led rather than necessarily content led. I think the principle is the same, is think first about not how much you're going to spend or where you're going to spend it, but what are you going to say about yourself? And quite often what are you going to say yourself compared to your competitors is a good place to start. And I think the worst thing you can do personally is just keep spewing, somebody else used the word, so I'll say it, spewing out content because you've got budget. You know, you've got or a content manager sat on his or her hands. What am I doing today? I've got to get some content out. No, stop. You know, spend it on something else. But there seems to be this kind of myth that because it's there, or because we have the ability to connect a piece of branded content with an audience, going back to that cartoon that's just been shown, we're not all waiting for the next piece of branded content from, you know, brand X. We've got other things to do with our lives. So at least think about what it means to be engaging people, to differentiate yourself from the competition. And my beef, I guess, and I would say this because of the nature of our business, is just putting something in Instagram and posting it, you know, costing you zillions of pounds because you used influencer X to endorse your brand, to me feels like quite crude marketing. And I think we just need to take a few steps back and think about what it is to, you know, go back to my original hypothesis. What does it mean to engage consumers? You know, just think a bit longer and harder and don't assume it's about spending budget.
Oh,
Brilliant. Does anybody
like
else got any
that.
comments on that?
Yeah, I'd love to chime in here. Mark, really like that example about compare the market, because it's not about the volume. Volume is good actually, but it is around the right content, which you said. And I want to talk very briefly about the voice space. I mean, it's new, so you actually you create beautiful, amazing content there, and you're kind of safe because you're ahead of the curve in that sense. I work in the ad tech space, and I think for a brand who's creating a lot of content, it's really understanding the ad tech behind that is available out there to you. In the video space right now, instead of running a ton of video and realizing if it resonated or not, you can predetermine if it's going to resonate and going to work. And there's there's a company called David with AI in it, and it's video, and it's just startling. It's just tremendous to see. It's got a bullseye target audience, and it will tell you straight up through working with AI technology whether, or it will tell you whether it's going to resonate, it's going to tell you the emotions, and it can guide you on how to re-strategize your campaign if you wanted to do that. So I think if you're going to when you've got the budget, it's really around looking at the technology that can help you to evaluate what the content is before you pump it out. That would be my advice.
cool.
Yeah, I'd like to add something. I think it starts with making sure you understand who your customers are. Because if you understand who your customers are, because they're obviously buying from you and they're loyal to you for a reason versus your competitors, if you know them and you know what you mean to them and what problem you solve and what your brand stands for, you will have your own standing. Now, you need to know what your competitors are doing, but that should never drive your decision making. It really starts with an understanding and I think there's tons of data. This is where I think even data science gets very exciting, is how do you know who buys from you? Why do they buy from you? I think, Mark, you talked about that. It's the why versus saying, what and how much. Is who are they? Because they will follow you and they will be loyal to you. I mean, look at Tesla, look at Apple, right? People love those brands and they will buy whatever they put out because they trust them. And I think companies like Tesla and Apple invest in learning about their customers and not just saying what they want, but reimagining what other problems they could solve that they don't even have yet, right? So I think that is extremely important, and sharing that across the company will make people make consistent decisions, right? To serving the clients, all the way from what you say in your ads to how the products that you create, how they're created, and then how you service them. So I think that I would not worry about competition that much. I think it's probably a 80-20 rule. 80% of the time, make sure you know who you are for your customers, and then make sure that your competition, leave some space, right? You got to get ahead for the people that are already your fans.
Cool.
Brilliant.
And there was a second part to that question, wasn't there?
Yes. Scott's on fire with the questions today. Are there risks with AI delivering the wrong information to their human counterparts or being put off their intended course if they begin sourcing volumes of unintended data, as was the case with Google AI on Twitter?
Oh yes, we know that one. We know Microsoft's bot, things gone wrong. These are the horror stories, but they're to learn from. And I think what we've learned, which is called AI ethics, right? AI ethics, removing racial bias, removing bias from the data. Because if you take, for example, mortgage loans, right? Because there was practice, at least in the US, when they've done the studies, how much racial bias there was and demographical bias. If we were to take that and automate it using AI, we are just going to exponentially create racial bias in the system. And so there's a lot of work being done in multiple organizations to ensure we create standards that the data is cleansed. And humans actually look at that to make sure what is worthy of going into training a machine learning algorithm. And also, you cannot trust 100% putting out a machine learning algorithm. They have something called unsupervised learning. We do not recommend that for clients right now. We say it has to be supervised, meaning a human is involved. You have to make some decisions. You cannot let these things out in the wild just yet, which is what happened with the Twitter bot, the failures that happened, the image recognition, Google's image recognition, right, where they characterize an African-American man as a gorilla. These are failures on the part of these companies to ensure that humans are watching and making sure they are monitoring and they're supervising them. Extremely important. I never recommend it. We're not at the stage where we can allow that to happen. Hope that answers the question, Scott.
Just to add to that, because it's part of our story, we spent a lot of time thinking about the use of AI for our business. And actually we spent the best part of 18 months going down a rabbit hole trying to build the tech to identify content that would be interesting, relevant, motivating to consumers in the mode of brand storytelling. And it just couldn't be done. I think more than one person said the creative process or creativity is 20 to 30 to 40, 50 years out. To be honest, I hope it never gets done, because I think that doesn't almost the undoing of us as a race. If literally AI can think laterally and creatively, because we will have diminished as a result. It's my personal view, but hey. But what we did do, which I think is actually important, and I find it quite reassuring, is we used AI to help we have human curators. So the reason why I would argue our stuff looks good is because we've got people with good taste, know how to tell a brand story, but they're using AI to automatically scrape the most relevant content for them to make judgment calls on as to what's going to tell the best story. So I love AI to bits, but as an enabler to what we do rather than it being the finished product. And there are loads of, for us, competitive businesses out there called content aggregators, and they try and do kind of what we do with having Twitter walls up at a live venue. And I don't know if you ever walk past one, but I want to get past it as quickly as possible because it's just a load of noise. But you know, I do think, I'm not saying anything particularly new here, but AI is extremely useful, but don't ever forget that the human,
that's right,
the ability to process information the way humans do creatively is something to be cherished, actually, rather than just, you know, beaten by a piece of machinery.
Indeed.
And then from a voice perspective, it's very different, of course, because we're not looking at the aggregators or any of that sense as well. That the AI is really the device itself, and the content that you put in, you're actually programming it. There is really not, so it's a different, and it's a much more trust and safer environment with this consumer behavior and how it works. So it's like different. So it's quite nice.
Cool. And what are the biggest challenges for 2021 in the creation of authentic content?
I can go again. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
So,
Please go ahead.
I would be very sort of, I think everybody's still in recovery mode, to be honest. I think you're getting back in the saddle, I think, is a phrase I heard earlier this week. So honestly, I don't think we're getting our heads around new trends or new technologies, whatever. We're just trying to remind ourselves what it was like to do business. You know, in the sense that you know, trying to do negotiations with other people sat in their kitchen whilst you're in a bedroom or something. It's a kind of a bit of a weird existence that we've grown used to. But to answer your point, I actually think the need to rethink content or authentic content so that it is fit for purpose I don't think it's going to go away. And the reason for that is, and going back over the presentation I made I was alluding to, is that in the world I occupy, where it's quite often bringing together rights holders and brand owners as sponsors via content through the conversations around events, be it sporting or music or fashion or whatever, the real driver of change in 2021 is going to be brands saying to themselves, why are we sponsoring this event? You know, what are the value we're getting out of sticking a badge on somebody's, you know, football shirt or a hockey shirt or whatever. And so I think the ability to use content and maximize its value in a way that's motivating to audiences is not going to go away. I think that the commercial pressures to justify a budget spent on creation, and I hope on curation as well, I think those commercial pressures are just going to intensify.
Cool. Okay. All right, what's the next question? Oh, sorry.
So, yeah, just on that one, I think so. I've worked with a lot of clients from the influencer to the voice space throughout COVID around that content creation, around messaging. And I think going into 2021, it's a real big responsibility for all brands to look at what their core values are. What COVID drove more than anything else is people sitting up and going, what are the brand values? Where do they stand for around sustainability, around authenticity, about human rights? And I think it was noticed the brands who didn't speak during the lockdown and the ones that did. And I think going into 2021, really looking at who they stand for and their values, I think they've got a huge opportunity. It was just Gen Z who locked up the brand's ethos, and that's now going into the older audiences as well. So it's a really big opportunity to work with the change wave that's happening now in the world around equality and people and so forth. So I think your message really tying back to those core values is your opportunity.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I think taking a step back, I agree with Mark. I think people have taken a pause, and I think they've gotten the pause and a reset opportunity to step back and say, what are we really doing? Who are we as a company? Because how people have responded, like Maria was saying, I think it's going to define, we're going to have a very different world. We're not going back to the way we were. In what I can see, I think it'll be more thoughtful and more reflective, hopefully.
Fantastic.
And I think we've got time for one more question. What steps should marketeers take to adopt this AI technology? Should it be baby steps or huge strides? And what are they?
I can take this real quick because I have a mantra that I give all my clients and my team. It's crawl, walk, run. The state of AI technology at best is at a toddler stage. I always like to compare it to human terms so people get that right away, be it business decision makers or developers or analysts. It's just that you cannot expect AI today to be at adult level. Marketeers need to think through what's the very first thing they can solve. Do small, tiny POCs to solve the top problems that you have. Like, is it creating authentic content? Is it curating content? Where do your challenges lie? Pick that area and run a POC. Do the crawling and learn from it, right? And continuously iterate, because you don't know what you don't know. What one company does is not the same as another company. There's not a one size fit all, which is why some of these SaaS offerings, I feel, fall short, because I've worked with a lot of them and they get you only so far because they're trying to solve the problem for everybody with the same solution, which is why I encourage my clients to think about, we can use that as a testing ground, but we are too early in the stages to have some standardization. So experiment, look at the technologies that are out there, which is why I actually went and created my own consultancy, because we're too soon to productize, right? At some point I will productize, but I think using the best in class technology tools and experiment. By the way, the other thing I want to point out, having worked for these very large brands, Citigroup and stuff, I mean, think about their budgets. They have very large budgets. They have machine learning engineers, they have data scientists. The medium size and the small size businesses don't have that kind of budget. So what I'm trying to do is democratize the access to these tools, because if we don't help that segment, which is the largest size of that make up business, is the small and medium sized businesses, we're going to falter. So that's one of the things that I'm focused on, is to make sure we can democratize these tools. So crawl, walk, run in the end is what I would say.
I think that's really brilliant advice, actually. And there's like a really nice term that sort of goes hand in hand with Joshi's point, which is agile. And a lot of companies, you can pay them to do a project work, and then you're kind of looking at paying for the outcome. Whereas if you work in the agile space, you're in the test and learn environment as it goes along. So I'd advise you to sort of use that and explore that when you're working with any technology provider partner, because it will help you with that walk run. With Joshi's lovely expression there.
Brilliant. Okay.
Cool.
So just before we hop off, Salamandra.uk is running a competition at the moment. So if anybody fancies winning a £150 Deliveroo voucher, all the details, I've just popped them in the chat there. And there's a link to our shiny new website. But massive thank you to our speakers. Christine, I don't know if you want to wrap up.
That was great. You guys covered so many facets of this topic, and it's as you say, with regards to next year, it's going to be, everyone needs to so focus on content, authentic content, and finding the right channels to get to engage. And I love that sort of engagement of the fans as well. I think that's such an important and human aspect to it. That's probably why it's apart from the vanity side, because we all love to see ourselves in big lights, don't we? But I think it's great. And thank you so much for the fantastic talks. They will be available on our YouTube channel, and we will send out the URL as soon as it's all edited up and shiny and looking beautiful. But thanks again, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Have a
you.
great evening,
Bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.